Hey guys, my name is VaulSC. I'm going to be talking about a tabletop wargame called Conquest. There are actually two versions of the game you can play. One of them is called First Blood, which is more of a skirmish game where you have the miniatures with circular bases. Then there's a larger version of it called The Last Argument of Kings, which is a rank and file game where you slot these circular bases into a square stand. And this game is much more of a throwback to the old classic Games Workshop Warhammer, the game of fantasy battles, and that's the main game that I'm interested in. The game is made by Bellum, who I believe are from Greece, if I've got that correctly, and it's a new wargame that I am getting into, but this video is going to primarily concern the miniatures, and we're going to talk about what the minis look like and review them. I haven't yet had the opportunity to play any games of Conquest, and that's why I'm just focusing on the miniatures first, and we'll do some analysis of the rules later once I've played a few matches of it. But I think the miniatures really are the main reason why somebody decides to get into a new tabletop wargame or decides not to. For me, when I've looked at a lot of games and gotten into them and stayed with them for a long time, it usually is just on the strength of the aesthetics and the miniature sculpts and what it's like to put them together and then play with them. So that's what we're going to be primarily focusing on today. For those of you guys who know me, you know that I've been covering Infinity the Game by Corvus Belli for the last 8 years. If you're still watching, welcome back. Good to see you again. For those of you guys who are here because of Conquest and you may be thinking about starting it or already into the game, then hi, my name is Vaul. I am doing this video as the first Conquest video, hopefully the first of many to come, but I've been doing Infinity for a really long time. But before that, I also covered War Machine and Hordes and Games Workshop games like 40k and Fantasy and some computer games like StarCraft and Dawn of War as well. But for a little while now, I'm going to be doing some Conquest stuff. I'm assembling my first army at the moment, and once that's up and running, I'm going to be playing some games and doing some videos covering the rules as well. Alrighty, so let's just launch into it, talk about the miniature aesthetics and a few other different points. Really just starting with the aesthetics and what they look like is probably the first way to go. I think, this may just be my opinion, but when you are designing miniatures for a game that's meant to be like a sword and sorcery medieval fantasy style game, you want to strike a balance between two extremes. On the one hand, if you make your miniatures look exactly like historical medieval figures, what you're doing, I think, is you're overlapping too much with existing games that already do that. There are a lot of games out there that currently do have miniature ranges which look very much, basic historical stuff that has been done. And if you make them look too much like existing fantasy games, then you're running too far into Games Workshop territory, and you're making them look too much like Lord of the Rings and Warcraft and Game of Thrones. And there are a lot of miniatures out there that already do that. On the other hand, if you're trying to deviate too much away from that, and you're going, okay, let's make the miniatures look just completely different, nothing like anything that already exists, then you run into the danger of going too far away from the tropes and making the miniatures look a little bit too weird and outlandish, and nobody really wants to own that. So you've got to strike that balance that includes some of the lovable tropes from sword and sorcery fantasy games that people really like, and of course the other extreme of going too far away from that. And I think that Conquest, Bellum, have done a reasonably good job of that. So I just want to dive into just a few sample pictures that I've looked at and just sort of talk about what I like and what I don't like so far from the way things look. Actually, one more point before we go too far into this. Obviously, when you have a company which is developing a miniature range over a period of time, the sculptors who are in charge of making the miniatures for that particular project are going to get better over time. And we see that with every, game manufacturer that puts out miniatures over years and years and years. So the same is true here. You're going to see some old classic sculpts and some much better newer ones. And I think if you're on the fence about this game and you're considering it and you're looking at it and you're just judging the whole, catalog of miniatures by the oldest stuff, you sort of are missing out on the fact that they have got a lot better. On the other hand, if you've only seen the most recent stuff, do bear in mind that you may need to include some of the older stuff in your army to create a 2,000 point force, which is the standard points for the game. So looking at these men-at-arms here for 100 Kingdoms, which is the generic human faction, in fact the one that I'm playing, Look, I think these are pretty cool. I mean, I am looking forward to owning these and painting them myself one day, but you can see that they're a bit basic. Some people think that these sculpts are a bit bland, and as I mentioned, they are very similar to the old sort of historical sort of aesthetic of medieval fantasy, and not everybody is into this. However, if you contrast that with these unit of knights here, these are the Crimson Tower Knights, they are quite bulky and brutal and savage looking, and they draw from a few different reference points in, medieval and sort of combat history, and they are posed a bit more dynamically. So these seem to me a little bit more like what you'd expect from a really cool fantasy war game. And again, these are slightly more recent sculpts. And then when you go over to these Knights of the Ashen Dawn, which are the most recent sculpts for this particular faction, you can see that they've gone even more brutal with them, gone even more over the top. These are like an elite superpowered unit, but like the ornate details and bits and pieces here and the level of design has taken these guys a little bit further away from just generic historical looking figures, and you've included a lot of other elements of fantasy in here and made something which is a bit more of a unique creation. I love how the horses look like the Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. I think that's kind of comical. They don't get every detail right, and they're never going to please everybody, but the main point I want to make here is that they are, continuing to go through this developmental journey where they just sort of discover the identity of their game and make it a bit more unique and appealing, right? So we've got a lot of difference in all the different factions. I'll go through some of the other comparisons and points of detail that I think are interesting. Let's have a look at these Nords Valkyries here. These kind of remind me of the high elves, the Alariel, Everqueen, bodyguards kind of thing. The Nords are like the Vikings faction, and this is one of the few units in the game that actually, is a group of females. It's kind of interesting. I like the fact that they are definitely drawing from the Viking mythology kind of look. Maybe a little bit of Celtic sort of ideas in there as well. But again, there's some deviation away from that, and they've taken the original sort of inspiration and made it into something that is, fit for a unique and individual game. And the sculpts themselves, I think they look okay. Let's check out an example of a unit that I perhaps didn't like as much. If you look at these Dwarf Thanes, the thing about these guys is that you get a plastic sprue which has a choice of heads, but my issue with a unit like this is that a lot of the expressions on the faces look very, very similar, and the way that they've all grown their beards is very sort of uniform and unique, which may be the point, maybe you're sort of going with the sort of the fluff idea that they all sort of, dress the same way and they do their facial hair the same way. But to me, this unit doesn't scream out to me like I really want to start the war game because of a unit like this. But I think they do grow on you over time as you sort of get into the hobby range. If we compare that to a bit more of a recent lot here, this is the same faction, but because they're the dwarf faction, or the Dwegom as they are called in the game, you've got these sort of steel contraptions which are battlefield golems kind of speak, and they look a little bit more interesting and unique and more appealing, I think, as miniatures. I'm yet to see these in person because they're a brand new set, but I'm actually quite interested in them. Let's come over here to this Nord unit, which is I think this is a more expensive miniature because it's their Artisan series, and I think it possibly is made out of resin. I'm not too sure. Either way, it's got a lot of detail in it, and it's a giant. This miniature is absolutely massive in real life, in person, when you look at it. But it gives you, as you can see, a lot of freedom to put a lot of painting details into it. And just, again, the design, I think, is very outlandish, very fantasy, and yet it's not too far away from the fantasy theme. It really fits in the world, and it gives you that sort of unique flavor of a particular faction. So I really appreciate that as well. Coming over to the Spires, this is a kind of a more unique faction, and they are essentially aliens that have come from off-world, and something went drastically wrong, and they're sort of stranded, and they're much more weakened. I think this is the replacement for the elves. Like you have a tabletop war game with a lot of factions, you expect the elves to be in there. They are not with Conquest. Instead, you've got the Spires, which are very different from the elf kind of archetype, if I can say that. They are creatures that grow a lot of their own soldiers. So these are the force-grown drones that are really basic infantry. I think that this unit aesthetically looks terrible. I think it's partly just because the sculpts are pretty boring, but also partly because the person painting the regiment and choosing the colours and stuff has just done a really bland job of it. So I wanted to point to some of the weaker kind of regiments and sculpts. One thing you guys may learn about me if you're new to my YouTube channel is that I'm not a salesman, I'm not a shill, I'm not here to just promote a company like non-stop 100% endlessly. I'm here to sort of talk about the pros and the cons and the good stuff and the bad stuff. And I just want to sort of point out that not everything's perfect here. But then if you come over to the Avatara, which is another unit from the same faction, again, the spies, the kind of alien race kind of faction, these units actually look really, really cool. And they are like twice as tall as the normal warriors. They look really scary and impressive, and they're really fast on the tabletop. And this is a regiment which I think is really appealing and would make me want to play that faction. So you can see it's a little bit hit and miss, but the main takeaway is that they seem to be improving and getting better at releasing more interesting sculpts over time. In terms of faction diversity, let's jump over here. We have the Wadroon, which are effectively they're based on orcs. But if you think of the fact that orcs have become a wide variety of different things and a lot of different fantasy IPs, if you think most closely to, I think, the Games Workshop Savage Orcs from Warhammer Fantasy back in the day, but they are riding dinosaurs and they have dinosaur pets and dinosaur allies, so that makes them more similar to the Lizardmen in some ways. So you've got a fusion of those two factions. If you think the marriage between Games Workshop Warhammer Fantasy Battles Savage Orcs with Lizardmen. Then you've got these little Raptor Rider guys here, and I guess the Dark Elves also had the cold ones that they rode. But this unit I think is really neat. They are just posed so dynamically. The painting is pretty good on these ones, and just the sculpts I think are really, really amazing. So this is something which motivates me to get into the game and makes me interested in this faction for that reason. I'll have a look here at the Old Dominion Legionnaires. This is the generic undead faction. Those of you guys who started really early, over a decade with me on my YouTube channel, you may remember I used to play Tomb Kings, which was a faction back in Warhammer Fantasy back in the day. And I was sort of known for being the Tomb Kings player on YouTube. So you might think that I would naturally be drawn to the Old Dominion. I do like the Old Dominion. Just in terms of their list building and their rules, they didn't excite me as much as the 100 Kingdoms did. And the miniature range isn't fully fleshed out yet. They haven't really released a lot of the units that are available to them because they're a newer sort of faction to the lineup. But they are cool. I mean, I can imagine playing these guys as a second or a third faction in years to come for sure. Is there anything else I wanted to go over with the aesthetics? I think one more, I think the dwarves, again. If you have a look at this, some of the miniatures that they have for this game are really huge, like in terms of the scale. And when you think of a faction like dwarves, in the old fantasy kind of thing, they didn't really have monstrous creatures, they didn't really have spells, they're all about sort of crossbows and axes. But in this particular system, they do have mythical creatures, they do have spell casting. They make me think a little bit more like the Chaos Dwarves from Warhammer Fantasy, as well as being the classic dwarf archetype. So I definitely feel like this has expanded on the idea of the archetype without going too far away from it, which is again something that I find really appealing, that I think that they should go for, and they have achieved. So in terms of aesthetics, there's a lot to love. There's a few things in there as I've demonstrated that isn't great, but that's just going to come down to you guys, really. I've given you the best sort of look at it that I can for now on a short version. The next thing I want to talk about is the scale of these things. We are talking about a miniature range that is at 38 millimeters instead of 28. So they are sort of ogre size compared to the classic Warhammer scale. All the games that I've played, Warhammer, 40k, War Machine of Hordes, Infinity, has all been at that small sort of 28 millimeter scale. But this is a lot bigger, and there's a few things about the scale, the 38 millimeters. First of all, you can paint a much more detailed miniature when you've got like a larger miniature. You can fit more freehand on there. So that's something I've started to enjoy with the miniatures I've been painting. They do take up more space on the tabletop, so even if you're on a 6x4 table, it does feel a bit cozier and a bit more intimate, and the units are hitting each other much more quickly because of the scale. The units are just larger compared to the same tables that we've been using for decades. The other thing about the 38mm scale that I think is noteworthy, and this is just a guess from me, but I feel like one of the reasons why they've chosen to go up to 38mm is because of the secondary market. If you come out with a Warhammer Fantasy style game with 28mm troops, and your factions are very similar to old classic Warhammer factions, there are going to be too many people that just go into the shelf and dig up their old Savage Orc army, their old Empire army, their old Tomb King's army, and whatever they've got, and they just immediately proxy their old 28mm miniatures as the army in your rulebook without going out and buying them from your store. And that may sound cynical, but I think that that has got to have occurred to the people who created this game, and I probably would have done something similar in their shoes. I think it's a good business decision. It definitely makes it feel like a new and fresh experience, and it really does encourage you to go and buy their new miniatures firsthand. Because let's face it, there's just so much in the market now. There's a 28mm that can be used as a proxy. So yeah, that may have been a consideration. I mean, you've also got a lot of 3D printing stuff now, but I mean, the thing about 3D printing is you can easily print it at 38mm scale if you want to. But at the moment, I can't see any motivation to go and buy proxy 38mm miniatures. I really want to buy their miniatures and paint them and assemble them and play with them, and I think that they've got that right. So that's the thing about the scale. The materials. So if we talk about what these things are made out of, it's mostly plastic, and the plastic is quite tough and hard and brittle. It reminds me of a lot of the old classic Games Workshop sprues and kits there. You can do a fair bit of kit bashing because the arms and the heads and bits and pieces are separate, and they sort of look similar in terms of the way they slot together between units. So if you're playing the humans, you could sort of put the heads of the knights of the men at arms on the militia or whatever it may be, or interchange the knights around a little bit. There won't be too much of that, but I do like the fact that that is possible. I like the fact that the arms and things are very posable, so you can actually have a bit of control over the way that they sort of are dynamically posed within a regiment. And when you've got like 12 guys all standing together, that's really, really important. It's terrible with these kits where the arm is just there's like a blocky kind of cube-shaped joint where it has to sort of stick into position in only one particular configuration. It's much better when you can actually sort of just move it around a bit and actually have it posed the way you want, so that you have a variety of different poses within the same unit. I think that's really, really important. I am terrible with assembling plastic miniatures. I just use a craft knife and I'm just chopping bits off. Really want to use nice sharp clippers and then just sort of shave them down with a knife. I'm not really a modeling and hobby expert. I just do it the easy way over many, many years. Some of the characters are resin, so I did experience a little bit of softness and issues with stuff chipping off where I didn't want it to chip off, but that's just, I think, a problem with me more so than the miniatures themselves. So long as you are sufficiently careful with your miniature sort of preparation phase, you're going to have a decent time, and the miniatures do look pretty good and they're very well detailed. I will also say something about the cost. When you're getting into a new tabletop wargame, it can be very expensive. You've got a lot of miniatures to buy. These miniatures, despite being plastic, are not cheap. We all know that it costs mere cents, pennies, to inject plastic into a sprue and just shrink wrap it in a box. It's very, very cheap to produce these. The cost, of course, is the marketing and packaging and the designers and the people working for the company. That's where all the money goes, as it should. But it is not cheap, and I must say that this game would definitely be more expensive than playing a small skirmish game like Infinity or like Malifaux. I don't know if it's as expensive as Games Workshop, but it's getting up there. The only bit of advice I would give if you are really keen to get into games like this is to try to avoid paying full price on the actual source website. A lot of YouTubers have affiliate links where you just get 10% off, so at the bare minimum, you should be using something like that. Go and watch some of the YouTube channels where they're doing bat reps for Conquest, and a lot of them will just have a link in the description where you can just get an affiliate 10% off, and that helps them, and it helps you, and that way you are just saving a bit of money when you're getting into the game. I think when you do group orders with certain people who are already sort of heavily involved, you can get some pretty good deals as well. After I bought my first set of stuff, I got an email from Bellum saying, hey, do you want to have 20% off in your next order? So I did that. I dropped about $500 recently, and I put the 20% on, so that was really, really helpful. So yeah, I mean, when you have a look at the initial prices on the website, don't be too turned off by that, because sometimes they do sales and things and discounts and occasional price decreases, I'm told. But it is what it is. Tabletop wargaming is going to be expensive either way, so it's just really down to you whether you can justify that. Alrighty, another thing I want to point out is that in my Discord, I have a personal Discord with quite a lot of people in it. We are all there because of Infinity, because that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years. But I'm now going to have a dedicated channel where people, if they want to come and talk to me directly about Conquest and chat about the rules and the miniatures and get games organized and possibly play on Tabletop Simulator, we can be doing that. So feel free to come and hang out with us in the link down below in the video description to join the Discord. Alright, so I just want to round out the last part of this video by going over some painting that I've been doing with my miniatures. You can sort of see what I've been getting going here with my my characters. So there's the Noble Lord, the Theist Priest, and a few of the Militia. I am going for a color scheme which is very similar to a miniature painted by a person called Anna. I found a miniature that she did on the Cool Mini or Not website, and it's kind of like an Alice in Wonderland themed knight, which I quite like the colors for. I like just choosing these really bold, strong colors, so it's mostly going to be like a deep red that hasn't really been highlighted very much, plus a very dark blue that's been highlighted all the way up to like a turquoise white kind of color, and that's going to be the main theme. But some of the less expensive troopers in the army, like the Militia, are going to have these sort of wooden shields and spears and sort of faded red kind of clothing, so you can tell the upper class away from the lower class, so to speak. So happy with the color scheme so far. Let's just talk you through what I've been doing with a Household Knight regiment that I've been painting. So here we are here. I always undercoat with pure black. It's just nice and easy to spray coat it and go from there. I will say about this little tutorial that I am not an expert painter. I have never focused on being the kind of painter that wins competitions, but over a couple of decades of painting, I've just gotten really good at painting miniatures very quickly up to a reasonably good tabletop standard. So this part of the video may be of interest to you if you are really bad at painting and just want to paint something decent very quickly. I wouldn't recommend, copying me for any of the things that I do, because I have so many bad habits, from the perspective of painting your miniatures like as well as possible. So if you want to become a painting master, get yourself an airbrush, watch some pro tutorials. I wouldn't really focus on this. As you can see here though, I go with just a straight black spray paint, and for a lot of my bases, I think the cheapest and easiest way to make a base look really good is just to put a bit of PVA glue on it and use some basing grip, which you can buy for a hobby store, or sand just from the side of the road or the beach, which is exactly what I've done, because then you can put a lot of the static grass and kind of flock materials on it, which is something which is very easy but produces a really good result. So even if you're not a very good painter, you haven't got very good motor skills, you're not very good with a paintbrush, it's just so easy to make the whole product, the whole miniature, look really good with the base done that way. So again, with medieval themed, I mean, you can get really fancy and have them on little bases that are like a temple floor, and use like bricks and slate and little bits of stone, but just the open battlefield with rocks and clay and grass is probably the most straightforward way to do a good job without messing things up. So that's what we're going to go for with this army. It's just going to be a really dark brown to begin with, and as you can see here, I'm just blocking the colors with a very dark blue. So I'm now starting to use scale color. These are really good paints. This is the deep blue scale color, SC55 it says on the thing. These paints need to be shaken up a lot, because I think there's a bit of a gel component in there. When I first tried to use them, it really wasn't mixed when I put the paint out, and then I just looked it up online and I found you have to really shake it like a lot before you use these, otherwise you just don't get that consistency. But as you can see here, I've applied a nice consistent coat because the paint has been shaken really well. And it's just good to be using a paint that's not Games Workshop paint, of course. The other thing too is that with these, I find that the top of them actually pops out if you do it too hard, like this little bit at the top. You want to just make sure you're not sort of squeezing on it too hard, otherwise the whole thing rips out and you've got paint all over your clothes. So just be really careful with that. But otherwise, it's just a really good efficient dropper bottle, I find. So blocking in the red here, this is one of the main colors I want to use. Red is a difficult color to highlight. If you use white and red, it becomes too pink. And if you use yellow, it becomes really orange and fiery, and it just looks like your model's on fire. So I try not to highlight it too much. My strategy here is going to be to add shadows by putting a bit of a wash in, so I get into the crevices and then just repainting it with red. But as you can see here, primary colors just really contrasting well with the black and the blue. In the flag, I'm using a very deep purple, again from scale color. I want my army to sort of look like they're very rich and ostentatious, and you know, going for a parade more than sort of soaked in the mud of the battle. And I'm achieving that with sort of these very bright imperial kind of colors. Over here, just wiping a bit of grey onto the horse. We're going to be building it up just to have a little bit of a highlight, leaving a lot of the horse flesh black or grey. You can't really see too much of it anyway. Just trying to remember what I'm actually doing. So over here, this is a close-up where I've just painted the lance. You can't really distinguish this color, which is a dark grey, from the rest of the miniature yet, but as I begin to build up the miniature and paint different parts of it, you'll see the contrast. One more layer of color over the base, so this is just like an ochre kind of color, or very light brown, just being wiped over the base. I'm not going to put too much effort into detailing the base here, because a lot of this is going to be covered up by static grass and flowers and bits and pieces, so you won't see very much of it, but having at least 2 layers of paint here is just really quick and easy and useful. On the flag, I have mixed some metallic silver together with blue. That's the same blue I'm using on the base of the knight there, and you can see I'm just blocking in some of the metallic colors here, and this is eventually going to be built up to a gold, but instead of painting the entire thing gold, I'm just going to go over the raised areas just to make it look a bit more interesting and a bit more rich. While I still had some of that paint on my palette, I decided to just mix in a little bit of yellow or green or whatever I've used here, and just use the residual paint there to just go over the bits that look like leather or borders, and that's just a nice contrast to some of the other paints that I've used on this miniature. So zooming out over here, I think this is the stage where I have just painted a little more of the horse in, and just another photo of me using some of that green brownish kind of tone there. I've also applied a little bit of a wash at some point. What's happening here is that, in fact, I think this is pre-wash. I've actually just highlighted up the blue a bit, just building up some of the highlights before I then go through and wash it, and now you can see the wash being applied and just sinking into the cracks and just building up a bit of a texture, consistently layering it up. On the actual flag itself too, I'm sort of going back over the lion and the sun and the lettering here with just metal, with just silver, so it's just highlighting over the very dark bluish kind of metallic tone that we had before. And then another view out here of the wash being applied to a lot of stuff here. Also washing some of the red as well with a bit of a kind of a glazy kind of color there to rebuild that later. All right, so coming back over here, at this point I am going over this is where the wash is dried, and I'm starting to sort of just highlight it back up with blues, and I'm just adding more of the straight up blue. This one's called Adriatic blue. Just adding a little bit of off-white colors there until it's just nice and highlighted. So this is just with a little bit of Adriatic blue and a white all through it, so it looks very, you know, toothpastey, as I like to say. Possibly a bit too highlighted, but I'm kind of digging it. On the flag, I tried something kind of experimental. I've sort of highlighted up the purple, and I've blotched it up a bit with a few other colors as well, and I decided to add in a little bit of yellow, which has made this sort of blotchy, sort of brown color, which makes it appear like there's a bit more of a texture from a distance, although close up it does look a little bit murky. That's okay, I may go over that. And then you can see here, I've got the gold coming in now. So this was the plan all along, just to highlight over that lion's face, because it's a lion. It's got to look yellowish, you know, it's the skin color of the lion, but it's meant to look like a statue of a lion on a flag is the main idea there. You can also see that I've applied the gold and the metal to the embroidery, or whatever you call this, the embellishment on the shield. So we've got a little spearhead with a laurel leaf in there as well, and some of the bits on the side of the horse's armor. And this is the finished result here, where you can see the full unit of knights with a lot of basing, sort of flowers and foliage there as well. Again, I think if you are, if you feel like you're not the best miniature painter in the world, and you just want your miniatures to look as good as they can without having to go through a lot of tutorials, the base is the easiest way to do that. You can simply buy these flowers and these bits of foliage at a shop and just glue them with PVA glue onto your base, and it just makes such a massive, unit to you. Makes a massive difference to your unit and your regiment in terms of their presentation without having to be an expert painter. So this is the first unit of Conquest that I've painted. I really like these units of household knights here. They are a really cool sculpt. Again, they look like a classic sort of generic fantasy style unit of knights, but again, they've been developed and designed in a way which has taken them a little bit away from what's done before, so they look a bit more unique and original, and something worth having in a tabletop miniatures wargame. So that's all I'm going to say today, guys, about the miniatures from Conquest. If you have any questions, if you like what you see, come and chat with me on Discord, leave me a comment. But if you want to see more Conquest stuff on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. I am going to be doing a whole bunch of this more in future as I continue to collect and paint the miniatures and eventually play some games. So hope to show you guys a bit more of that soon.